I'm Hannah. I'm a doctor with type 1 diabetes, and I've had type 1 diabetes for 20 years. Today we're going to talk about diabetic ketoacidosis, or DKA, which you've probably heard it called. And this is a time where our blood sugars get very high. We don't have a lot of insulin in our system, and our body starts breaking down fat and create something called a ketone. When the ketones build up in our bloodstream at high levels, it causes a lot of stress on our body. It causes our pH balance to get off in our bloodstream, and it can make it really stressful on a lot of our organs. And ultimately, if it happens for long enough and severe enough, it can put us into a coma, which can be really scary. It's not uncommon for people to have DKA at the time of type 1 diabetes diagnosis or later on as they're figuring out how to use insulin in a way that works for them. DKA is something that is really scary, and I know when I work at a camp for kids with type 1 diabetes and we talk about DKA at some of our medical education sessions, it's almost like a scary word. Everybody's, ooh, DKA, almost like we're talking about a monster or a ghost. And I know that sounds so silly, but it really is. It's like this ominous, scary, lingering, hovering thing on top of type 1 diabetes that brings a lot of fear to a lot of people. And what I found about DKA that made me feel less afraid of it was really just understanding what it is and how it happens. Because if you understand how it happens, you will be clued in to when it would make sense to prevent it. So I'm going to talk about DKA from the perspective of type 1 diabetes specifically. I'm talking about someone who's already been diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, already started taking insulin, not DKA at onset. That's a little bit different kind of from the context we'll look at. So DKA, or diabetic ketoacidosis, is when we have these ketones that build up in our blood. And the number one thing that you need to understand about DKA is that it happens from a lack of insulin. If that's the only takeaway you get from this, it will help you with your mindset and how you think about it. Ketones can only build up in our blood when we don't have enough insulin on board. Now, that's important to know. A lot of people get confused when they hear about a ketogenic diet or keto, which is on processed foods in the grocery store. Nutritional ketosis is not the same as ketoacidosis. And those two, I mean, they sound just alike and it's a similar process, but let me describe the difference. Nutritional ketosis is when we eat a lower carbohydrate diet. Our body is not burning carbs for fuel anymore. After it's burnt through our carb stores, it then starts burning fat for fuel. And it's a natural, healthy process that when we break down fat, we're going to release ketone bodies into our bloodstream that our body can use for energy production. And that's a wonderful thing because it means that if we go on a 10-hour hike and we don't have maybe enough calories, then we're going to be able to keep creating energy. We're not just going to bonk out when we've run through our carbohydrates. It really helps us in times of fasting. A lot of us, and most people, in a very healthy way, wake up with low-grade ketones in the morning because we haven't eaten overnight. We've been fasting. And so as our body kind of runs through the carbs in our system, it starts to break down fat. That's a good thing. Breaking down fat is a good, healthy part of our metabolism. Now, the reason it gets dangerous for people with type 1 diabetes is that what stops our body from creating too many ketones is the natural insulin production that someone without type 1 diabetes would have. Now, if you have type 1 diabetes and you're no longer producing insulin, there's no stop for making more and more ketones. And when we have high blood sugar levels and when we have high ketone levels, extremely high, much higher than we would see in healthy nutritional ketosis, that's when we get this state in our blood where it becomes acidic or electrolytes get imbalanced, and it puts a lot of stress on our essential organs. And that's what creates the risk of things like coma and death. And so the key here is insulin. So people who get into diabetic ketoacidosis with type 1 diabetes that's already been diagnosed is when we omit insulin. And sometimes people do this on purpose because they're burnt out with type 1 diabetes. That happens and it's not uncommon. So if that's something that has happened to you, know that you're not alone with it. Other times this happens because we're sick. Let's say we've got a stomach virus and we're day 3 in and we're just vomiting and we're throwing up and our blood sugars have been low a lot. And we say, hey, I'm not going to take my long-acting overnight insulin because I just don't want to be low tomorrow. That's something that can do it. Or if we're out and we're drinking and partying and we don't take our insulin that afternoon and evening, and then our blood sugar's really high from all the sugar and snacks that we ate, and the next morning we sleep in and we don't take insulin for a 12, 14, 16-hour period at all, that can as well. There's a lot of things, but the key between all of these things is omission of insulin, not taking the insulin. And so that's really helpful. Sometimes this happens when our blood sugar is really high. We have a high blood sugar because our insulin pump had an error, let's say, some type of error. Maybe it was the inset was kinked and we didn't know it, and we went 2.5 days thinking that we were getting our insulin, and our blood sugar just stayed high for hours and hours and it wouldn't come down, and we didn't know what to do. So we just kept bolusing on the insulin pump and we weren't getting the insulin. That is something that happens too. So there are lots of ways that can cause it, but it's not getting the insulin. So for me, when I am personally in a space where I need to be aware of DKA or diabetic ketoacidosis in my life, it is always when I'm in a place where I know I might not be getting insulin. So if I am really sick and I'm afraid to take insulin because I keep throwing up and I can't keep food down, I might understand that it's dangerous to not take any insulin all day. That's not going to work because I won't have the insulin in my body to prevent the ketones from building up and up. If I'm on an insulin pump and I'm giving a correction and my blood sugar is just not coming down, and it's 2 hours later and it's 4 hours later, and here I am on hour 8 of really high blood sugar, I need to figure out what's going on sooner, or I need to switch and go back to shots so that I can make sure I didn't miss insulin that long. When I go to bed and I know I'm going to sleep in, it's really important for me to know that I've got my long-acting insulin on board. That's something that I've forgotten, certainly throughout my life. I take long-acting insulin at night, and there have been a couple times, even in the last year, I think I forgot it once or twice, where I just forgot to do it before bed, and I woke up in the middle of the night with a blood sugar that was peaking, and I didn't know why at the time, and figured it out the next morning. That's a dangerous time, because anytime we don't have that insulin, the ketones can add up and up. So for me, it's really knowing if I am conscious with how much insulin is in my system, when the last time I took insulin was, am I missing that long-acting basal insulin, or if you use an insulin pump, that would be the basal rate that comes out of the pump. Am I missing that for an extended period of time? Or am I needing more insulin and letting my blood sugars run high for a long time in the setting of not understanding if I'm really getting my insulin or not? So that would be like the insulin pump error example. So it's always really important for me to be conscious of having insulin in my system at all times. And I have never had an episode of DKA with that understanding in 20 years. And it's not to say that understanding is bulletproof. It's certainly not. I think I've gotten lucky. But anytime something happens, I'm aware I need to keep insulin in my system. I can't even think of when I've had ketones last. Maybe in high school, but not something that had been a part of my experience with type 1 diabetes routinely at all. And it doesn't have to be, I think, if you can understand it. Now, sometimes things happen, right? Sometimes things are out of our control, or things are accidental, like the sleeping in example, or there's a misunderstanding, like the insulin pump example, or there are different things that can happen. But I think it's really helpful to just know that if we omit insulin for too long, then ketones are way more likely to come about. And it's really hard to bring down a high blood sugar. Let's say my blood sugar is 350 and I have high ketones. It's going to take me a lot more insulin in order to get that 350 down than if my blood sugar was 350 and I didn't have ketones, because the ketones create a stress on my body. Now, not everybody works that way. A lot of people do, but me personally, I know that if I'm higher and I have ketones, it's going to take a ton more insulin. And so I have to be really aggressive to get that insulin in my system. I use short-acting insulin if I'm worried about ketones, because that's going to kick in the fastest. I would make sure I had long-acting insulin on board, but I wouldn't take that to treat the ketones because that would take a long time to start working. I would use short-acting insulin, and I would monitor, and I would drink a ton of water. I do that because it's dehydrating. Hydration really helps flush out ketones, which is helpful. Anytime our blood sugars are over 60 plus or minus, there's some variance. Our kidneys actually know to start flushing more water or more urine out of our system so that we can get rid of glucose along with it. It's another mechanism to help keep our blood sugar lower. So if our blood sugar is 300s, 350s for hours, we're flushing a ton of water. We can get really dehydrated. When we're dehydrated, we have high ketones and we have high blood sugar. That creates a scenario where that blood is becoming acidic faster and faster. Those electrolytes are getting imbalanced faster and faster. So we need to be more aggressive with the treatment of it. And so hydration and insulin, short-acting insulin, and making sure I'm getting it through an injection. If I ever have ketones and I'm on an insulin pump, I personally will always do a correction with an injection because it's not worth questioning whether or not that insulin pump is working. And if it's not, I don't want it to progress and get worse, and it can get worse quickly. So I will take my injection through a syringe or through an insulin pen so that I know I can see it get into my system. I know I'm getting it. I will do a higher correction, and then of course I'll watch to make sure I don't go too low from the higher correction, and I'll retest every 2 hours. I'm really attentive to when I get times where my blood sugar is higher to bring it down quite quickly. I think that a lot of us aren't taught the mechanism of ketones, and that's why it's harder to prevent. I didn't learn this until I was studying biochemistry in college. I didn't learn this from a diabetes educator. I learned this like in the midst of a really hard class in college. And I was like, oh, that's how that happens. And then it allowed me to start looking at things from a perspective of prevention. So I'm sharing my story on what I do to prevent ketoacidosis. Understand that diabetic ketoacidosis specifically is omission of insulin, not taking insulin. If you can know that and you can keep insulin on board, you're way less likely to have those ketones build up and get into a dangerous state. And that is a really helpful tool. So I hope that this video is helpful. Thanks for sticking it out to the end. If you have had episodes of DKA, or it's something that you have a lot of fear of, or it's something that has come into your life because of fear of taking insulin or not wanting to take insulin for being burnt out or feeling frustrated with diabetes, I have a course coming out in the next couple weeks that is specifically designed to help people understand their limiting beliefs about diabetes and really shift their mindset in a way that feels more empowering. It's going to be a self-guided course online that's pre-recorded. You can do in your own time, and the wait list is available. I'll put it in the description below at the top so you can find it, and you'll get an email when it's available. But that's something that might be a good fit for you if you are having challenges in this area. Starting with mindset can be really helpful. I think there's kind of two pieces to DKA prevention. One is the knowledge piece, right? The insulin and ketone cycle that I talked about. And then two is your relationship with diabetes and your relationship with actions to balance blood sugar, because really getting those to a place where you feel empowered, you can rely on yourself, you understand what you need to do, and you want to do it because you feel okay about living with diabetes. That's really the sweet spot for the mindset. Please sign up for the course if you're interested, or if you have questions, I'd be happy to answer them. And thanks for sticking it out to the end. Bye.